I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. We're in the midst of a three-night run checking attack ads focused on the three leading candidates for governor in Oregon. We're going by the first letter of the candidate's last name. Last night it was Christine Drazan, D. Tonight, Betsy Johnson, J. It's our big story. Our big story has a bit of a twist tonight, and think about this with me for a minute. When was the last time you saw an attack ad focused on Betsy Johnson? Yeah, me either. I'm not sure any are actually running on TV right now. That's a bad sign for her campaign. It means the other two don't even consider her enough of a threat to spend money on.
Betsy
now,
Johnson,
it's not always been that way. I found this ad on YouTube. It was running about 3 weeks ago. And this one was running about a month before that, or a month ago, a week before that. Things changed quickly, though, and I could not find anything currently running that attacks Betsy Johnson. In case you're new to the area, Johnson is a longtime Oregon lawmaker, a Democrat who sometimes voted with Republicans. She quit the legislature to run for governor and quit the Democratic Party as well. She's running as an unaffiliated candidate. I began the process of fact-checking both of those ads, but then it occurred to me, there's not really that much point doing that because the ads aren't running. Instead, I think our time will be better spent talking about what it means that there are no ads running against Johnson. It means her campaign's in real trouble. Polling has found her campaign losing steam in mid-August, and it's dropped even more in October. Which is not to say she's totally out of the race. She's not. And either way, she is still a powerful force, taking votes away from maybe both candidates? But the pundits seem to think she's stealing more from the Democrat, Tina Kotek. And that's made it a super tight race between Kotek and the Republican Christine Drazan. Here's political scientist Jim Moore from Pacific University.
And you can also make the assumption that the reason it's very tight is because Betsy Johnson is a strong candidate in this race. She's there. She's kind of upended the usual calculus we would make of registered Democrats far outnumbering registered Republicans and the way unaffiliated voters would vote. Betsy Johnson has thrown a monkey wrench in all of those calculations. That's why it's close.
And clearly she's speaking to concerns that people have. Even with her lower poll numbers, she still has significant numbers of people that are going to vote for her.
Absolutely. You know, she's showing that she's going to get maybe about 20% of the vote. We'll see if that continues to hold up. But she could still win this. I mean, we're just a few weeks out. She could turn it around if one of the others has a stumble and something happens there. She could turn it around. It's happened in the past, but it's less and less likely.
Yes, and the lack of attack ads aimed at her speaks volumes, at least at this moment. Let's stick with the race for governor for a minute because we want to highlight some new poll numbers. And I got to tell you, these numbers were a bit surprising as Election Day looms. Here we go. Christine Drazan extends her lead from past polls. She's sitting at 44% now, while Democrat Tina Kotek is 6 points behind at 38%. Bad news for Betsy Johnson. According to this poll, her support has dropped to just 11%. This poll was done by the group Clout Research. They surveyed 842 likely Oregon voters by phone this past weekend. The margin of error for the poll is just over 3%. That same group did a poll 3 weeks ago with a sample size of just over 400 likely voters. And here's how things have changed since then. Drazan gained 5 points, Kotek gained 3 points, Johnson lost 5 points. Clout says Kotek's gain is due to Betsy's tumble as voters defect from Johnson. And here's another interesting note that we've seen in past polls as well. Christine Drazan holds a commanding lead among independent voters with 48% of the non-aligned vote. Kotek has 23% support from independents, and Johnson, who's running as the unaffiliated candidate, has just 19% support from the group that was supposed to be her base. And that brings us to these quotes from the Clout Research Group about Johnson's campaign. This is not my opinion or my words. This is what the pollsters have written. Johnson, whose poll numbers have been on a steady slide over the past 2 months, heads into the final month of the campaign with nowhere to turn to regain political support. They write, the survey supports the idea that Johnson has no way left to win this race as voters considered her and then left her behind. Yikes. So, What do you think of these new poll numbers? Do you think they're representative of the statewide temperature of this race? Do you think Betsy Johnson's campaign is cooked? We'd love to hear from you. Send us an email to thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail 503-226-5090. Well, maybe you think that poll was a little too generous to Christine Drazen, giving her a 6-point lead over Kotek. But check out this great resource from the group 538. They take an average of each of the polls in the governor's race, accounting for each poll's quality, when it was done, sample size, and partisan lean, and then spits out a number that basically represents where things stand right now. And it is really a fabulous thing to be able to look at, and you can look at this at home as well. And this graph just shows us the way things have changed over time. So in early August, things were pretty standard, and then look at this, right? Probably a week or two into August. In fact, August 14th is when things started to split. Johnson takes a dip, Drazen is going up. If we move it along, it was pretty much that way during September as well. And then in October, things began to change again, with Drazen going up, Kotek staying the same, and Johnson coming way down. So that is really an indicator of the tale of the race so far. If we go down to the next screen, we'll see the individual polls that they built this on. And when you go to 538 at home, you can see over here on the far side is the date of the poll, and then how many people were polled, what the letter grade is for the different companies. Some are considered more accurate than others. Emerson College getting an A-. They're saying that they have been very accurate over time. You can see who paid for the poll here in the middle. And then over here, you're going to get the results. And the easiest thing to do is come to the cheat sheet on the far right side. You'll see this most recent poll that came out that was done October 8th and 9th has Drazen up by 5 points. The next one, Drazen up by 2, Drazen up by 6, and so on and so on. If you want to know where Johnson is in all this, by the way, if you tap more, it will show you the Johnson number as well. So you can do that for all of these. You can see Johnson just between these two polls from DHM that Johnson went from 21 down to 16. It was done on the same date, so they probably are very close dates. So they were probably asking some different questions in there. But it is fascinating, I think, to dive into these polls, and you can really see the tale of what has been going on in the last several weeks and months, and that is that Christine Drazen has been on the way up. Tina Kotek kind of stayed the same, but Johnson has been dipping down and falling in these polls. All right, and while we're talking about the governor's race, make sure to tune in next week for the gubernatorial debate sponsored by KGW and the Oregonian. You don't want to miss this. It's Wednesday the 19th at 7 p.m. We'll have the top 3 candidates answering your questions live, and we hope you will join us. Now to an issue that's top of mind for so many voters, homelessness. There's new developments in the lawsuit against the city of Portland over homeless camps on sidewalks. You may remember a group of people with disabilities sued the city after they say homeless camps blocked many sidewalks, violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. And as Blair Best reports, the county gave out thousands of tents to the homeless back in 2021, which could be a real sticking point, potentially adding more government defendants to the lawsuit.
The lawyers behind this lawsuit say the 6,500 tents and tens of thousands of tarps that the county gave to the homeless are now making it nearly impossible for people with mobility disabilities to safely get around the sidewalks.
Often there's tents blocking the entire sidewalk where I don't see them because they weren't there.
Early last month, a group of Portlanders with mobility disabilities filed a lawsuit against the city, arguing the city is in violation of the American with Disabilities Act and the Federal Rehabilitation Act by allowing homeless tent sites to block sidewalks.
And I have to go out in the street a lot of times to get around them.
The city has since responded to the lawsuit, requesting Multnomah County, Metro, and the state of Oregon also be added to the case. The city's attorney did not respond to KGW by our deadline, but said in an email to the lawyer leading this case, quote, "As your lawsuit is currently presented, I believe it fails to recognize the important role and responsibility played by these other government entities, in addition to the city, in addressing this complex problem."
First of all, this lawsuit is under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
This is John DiLorenzo, the lead attorney representing the Oregonians who filed the lawsuit.
And the Ninth Circuit has made it pretty clear that sidewalks are within the ambit of the act, The city has jurisdiction over the sidewalks.
DiLorenzo's team found that back in 2021, Multnomah County's Joint Office of Homeless Services handed out 6,550 tents and 27,000 tarps to those experiencing homelessness,
which we think the county may have foreseen would find their way onto the sidewalks, which is the very reason my clients are suing the city. And so it places us in an awful situation where Multnomah County supplies the tents, which the city sweeps. Go figure.
It's not clear yet where the Joint Office got the money to buy the thousands of tents and tarps.
It may have been federal money that was used, may have been COVID relief money, may have been money from the homeless tax.
The Joint Office, which is run by Multnomah County, tells KGW in an email, the Joint Office has put half its budget this year into expanding and strengthening its shelter system. At the same time, the Homelessness Services System and the Joint Office have also continued to provide safety on the street services. But if the tents and tarps that the Joint Office gave to the homeless are found to be used in ways that block ADA access, the county could also be sued.
And if we have success here, I think this model could be replicated in other West Coast cities too.
Mayor Ted Wheeler tells us in an email that he can't comment on pending litigation, but that homelessness is his top priority, and he understands the frustrations around it, which is why he says he's issued so many emergency declarations. Now, the city is also asking for specific locations as to where these tents are blocking ADA access so that they can clear them. But again, that doesn't solve the problem. Blair Best, KGW News.
Up next on the story, a man accused of assault in Clark County, Washington, was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial and ordered to the state's mental health hospital. But after months of waiting in a jail for a bed to open up, a judge let him out until the hospital found a spot for him.
I simply can't continue to hold him on the expectation that maybe someday they'll come pick him up.
Now that same man admitted to a recent double murder in rural Idaho. What the court documents say about his mental state at the time of the crime, when the story continues. Yesterday, we told you about the early release of the first group of aid and assist patients from the Oregon State Mental Hospital. It's all because of an order from a federal judge to get more people help at the hospital instead of those patients sitting in jail cells waiting to get into the hospital. We mentioned that an overcrowded state mental hospital isn't just an Oregon problem, though. Washington State has the same issue. And earlier this month, a worst-case scenario played out that ended with the apparent murder of 2 people in Idaho. Let me explain. This is John Cody Hart. In August of 2021, he was charged with first and second degree assault in Clark County. An evaluation found Hart was not competent to stand trial. Court documents show the Army veteran was diagnosed with schizophrenia and a marijuana use disorder. So a judge ordered him to go to the Western State Hospital, that's Washington's mental health hospital, to try to restore his competency. That happened in mid-March. But he sat in jail for months, waiting for a bed to open up at the hospital. Finally, in July, his defense asked the judge to release him because he had been assaulted in jail, and also so that he could wait for a bed to open up from a place of freedom rather than sitting in a cell. Prosecutors said, hey, hold on, a bed is set to open up in just over a week, later on August 1st. So they asked that he be held until then. Plus, he was charged with a serious violent felony, they said. Here's how the judge ruled.
The court has reviewed this matter extensively at the request of the defense and given the state ample opportunity, both from its local representatives and from the state of Washington, to provide an explanation as to why, despite repeated dates when they indicated he would be transported, Mr. Hart has not been transported for competency restoration. Do this with some reluctance, as the charges against Mr. Hart are very serious. He's charged with a Class A felony, assault in the first degree. Apparently, however, the seriousness of his charges is not sufficient for the state to place a priority upon his competency restoration. I simply can't continue to hold him on the expectation that maybe someday they'll come pick him up.
And so Hart was let out on what's called an intensive supervised pretrial release until a bed opened up for him at the hospital. Among other conditions, he had to check in with pre-trial release services in person every other week. And he wasn't allowed to travel outside Southwest Washington unless a court approved it. Well, that did not all go so well. Hart was in Idaho at the beginning of the month, where he's suspected of shooting and killing this couple, Rory and Sarah Mahan. The owners of the Heartland Inn is who they are in the town of New Meadows. Detectives say Hart admitted to the shooting with a Glock, a gun he legally was not allowed to have. In fact, the judge who released him prohibited Hart from having guns, but in a technicality did not force him to surrender them. In the initial March order, when Hart was ordered to wait for a bed to open up at the Western State Hospital, he was told he could not possess firearms and to, quote, immediately surrender any concealed pistol license. He was required to surrender his license to carry, but not surrender the actual firearms. A Washington gun rights attorney looked at the records in Hart's assault case and said it could actually be an oversight by Washington state law. A separate statute in Washington allows a court to order someone to surrender firearms for a number of reasons. He thinks the Clark County Superior Court could have done it in this case, but did not. Perhaps because the prosecutor simply did not ask for it. Court records detail the killings and the apparent delusions that Hart was experiencing. The arrest warrant affidavit from Washington County shows Hart told a detective he went through drawers inside the Heartland Inn looking for socks that he thought belonged to his children. A man and a woman told him he couldn't do that. He couldn't go through other people's rooms and their things. Hart told detectives the 2 people snatched everything from his hands, making him feel like a thief. And then they called police. Hart said this made him angry and caused him pain, and he felt like the couple were kind of like Bonnie and Clyde. The affidavit says a deputy arrived to the inn where he talked with Hart, and then he left. The documents show at this point Hart, quote, prepared for the worst and was having only what can be described as troubled thoughts. It says, quote, when he heard Pope Gregory and John Paul say, are you going to let Bonnie and Clyde do that to our family? John told me that he didn't spite those people and that they still have life in their soul, not in their flesh. The shooting happened 24 minutes after the deputy left. Detectives say Hart told them he went to the front counter and shot both the man and the woman, the Meehan's. The county prosecutor there in Idaho says He now plans to seek the death penalty for Hart, saying the murders were especially heinous and cruel. Hart is in jail tonight without bail, and it's worth noting that on the day of the murders, October 1st, there still was not a bed available for Hart at the Western State Hospital. We were told the hospital prioritized open beds for people in custody, which Hart was for months. But after he was released and still was waiting for a bed, it seems like he got bumped down on the list until he murdered a beloved husband and wife and shattered the peace of a small town. Still to come on The Story. In the Pacific Northwest and across the country, the push to cut and eliminate greenhouse gas emissions is affecting entities from utility companies all the way down to school districts. Actually partnering up here in Oregon, and they're doing it well. We'll introduce you to our new environmental reporter here on The Story after the break. With the state looking to cut greenhouse gas emissions any way it can, some school districts have teamed up with Oregon's largest electric utility to do their part. Environmental reporter Cale Williams went to Salem to look at some of the newest and quietest school buses on the road today.
This bus behind me might look like what many of us went to school in. It's big and yellow, it's got rows of seats, but it's missing a few things: a tailpipe and a gas tank. Bus number 427 in Salem is one of 18 electric school buses funded statewide through grants from Portland General Electric over the last 3 years. And it's a hit with the drivers.
So on the electric bus is very quiet. I like the electronic braking. As soon as you release the gas pedal, it just starts braking right away.
The fact that if it's a cold day, you turn the bus on, doesn't have to warm up the heater immediately, is working. So that's a plus compared to maybe an old diesel bus.
But the bus's biggest benefit goes beyond the driving experience.
I know it sounds kind of weird, but you're driving the bus and you feel that it's all clean. You're not putting anything out into the air. It's a weird feeling because I've never driven an electric bus before, or electric anything before. But you know that there's no pollution coming out of this machine.
Salem's electric bus charges to full power in 3 to 4 hours and has a range of up to 75 miles. That means drivers like Regulus can do a normal route in the morning, charge the bus in the middle of the day, and complete a second route in the afternoon.
That's the battery usage. We have 97% left.
As the state pushes toward ambitious climate goals, seeking to cut carbon dioxide emissions from buses like these nearly in half by 2035, electric vehicles will play a crucial role. Transportation accounts for roughly 40% of greenhouse gas emissions in the state, more than any other single sector, according to data from the Department of Environmental Quality. And while emissions from most other sectors have gone down over the last 15 years, emissions from the transportation sector have remained stubbornly flat.
It is a fun vehicle to drive. It's nice to know that you're just not polluting the air. I mean, it's nice. It just feels fresh and clean.
So while one electric bus, or even 100 electric buses, won't get us all the way to our climate goals, each one is another step on the path to a lower carbon future.
And Cale joins me now. What a great story, and so interesting to see them doing that. Is that district going to expand with more electric buses?
They are. The officials down there told me that they have one there now, they have another on order, and they just got funding for a third. On top of that, they're also applying for 17 more full-size buses from the Environmental Protection Agency.
Is this the kind of thing that we're going to see maybe all districts do throughout Oregon?
You know, that remains to be seen, but it certainly is something that I think in 10 or 15 years you could see whole fleets of these vehicles on the road.
Yeah. And what about the difference between biodiesel, which I know a lot of buses run on, and these electric buses? Which is better?
Well, you know, there are pros and cons to both, but, you know, biodiesel still puts out carbon dioxide when you burn it. These electric vehicles don't. There are some questions out there remaining about, you know, exactly how environmentally friendly it is to get the minerals that they need to make these batteries. But in terms of just carbon dioxide pollution alone, these electric vehicles are definitely better.
Ah, very nice. And folks, you can tell he knows what he's talking about. This is Cale Williams. We stole him from the Oregonian. We're so thrilled to have him. He's an environmental reporter who's been there. Now he's here. And he's done a lot of great award-winning stories. And one that a lot of folks might be familiar with is Nora the polar bear. And for the folks that aren't, tell them a little bit about that.
So Nora the polar bear is a bear that was born in Ohio. She was hand-raised by zookeepers and eventually transferred here to the Oregon Zoo.
And you wrote a book about it, and this is the book we're showing.
I did. I originally wrote a 5-part series at the Oregonian, traveled up to Alaska for that. To talk to some of the folks that live in polar bear's natural habitat. That eventually got expanded into a book. I went up there 2 more times to talk to them about how climate change has affected their daily life and the changes that they've been seeing.
And has it been profound?
It has. I mean, the first time I went up there was in March of 2017. Bitterly cold, sea ice a mile out. I went up there same time of year, March 2019, and it was raining and there was no sea ice.
Wow. Yeah. So very dramatic change.
Indeed.
Wow. Okay, Cale Williams, going to be awesome having you here. Thanks for your great reporting.
Appreciate it.
And that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow.